Look, thanks very much for coming, everyone, for an important announcement this afternoon. I'd like to start by acknowledging Dylan Green from Transfolk of WA, as well as Danielle Laidley, who have joined the Attorney General and myself here today. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Stuart Aubrey, the member for Scarborough. Today is an important day, a day that sees my government deliver on a promise to remove barriers to the LGBTQIA+ community. Today we introduce a bill into State Parliament that streamlines the process for sex and gender recognition. The bill will firstly abolish the outdated Gender Reassignment Board. This will be replaced by a new administrative process that means Western Australians will no longer be required to undergo surgical reassignment to register a change of sex or gender. Instead, evidence required to support an application will be a simple statement from a medical practitioner or psychologist certifying that the person has undergone appropriate clinical treatment and/or counselling. The reforms do not change existing procedures that relate to registration of sex at birth when a child is born. The bill also contains a statutory review clause that ensures the community can provide feedback after 3 years where further refinements may be contemplated. The Attorney General will go into detail shortly, but I first want to make a key point. Today's important social reforms are not only consistent with recommendations from the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia, they also bring WA broadly into line with all other states and territories and Australian passports when it comes to gender options. Today's announcement is just the first tranche of our broader commitment to improve the lives of our LGBTQIA+ community. The second tranche involves our continuing work to develop a new Equal Opportunity Act and a ban to gay conversion therapies. This includes engaging closely with stakeholders and monitoring progress of the Commonwealth reforms that you'd be aware of. My government is also committed to developing legislation that deals with assisted reproductive technology and surrogacy. It's important that these reforms are done properly, which obviously means they cannot be hastily rushed. Everyone deserves the respect and dignity of being recognised as themselves, to have their legal identity align with their lived identity. These reforms are about diversity and about inclusion. But most importantly, they're about equality, and they are about humanity. I'll take some questions shortly, but firstly I'll hand you over to the Attorney General.
Thank you, Premier. I'll be going into Parliament today to introduce the bill to eradicate and repeal the Sex Reassignment Board. This is not radical legislation. This brings us into line with every other jurisdiction in the Commonwealth. We are the only state in Australia that has a Sex Reassignment Board. We will be proceeding forthwith with an administrative process where the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages will be responsible for determining the gender recognition on a birth certificate. This will be done on application of an adult person who is supported by a letter from a doctor or psychologist that the person has had appropriate counselling, and it won't be available to children under the age of 18 years unless with the consent of both parents. For children under 12, they won't be able to do a change of gender recognition on their birth certificate unless it's approved by the Family Court of Western Australia. Very important safeguards. There are further safeguards included in the bill which prohibit certain classes of offenders and people on community service orders and the like from applying for a change of gender on their birth certificate. Bear in mind that it's been over a decade that all Australians applying for a passport could nominate their own gender, or on renewal of a passport could nominate the gender in which they live. So we're only bringing Western Australia out of the dark ages up to a level of social reform that the rest of the country already respects and enjoys. So this is the basis of the bill. This is not world-shattering, because people in other states, this is an important part. If you live in Western Australia but were born in Victoria or Queensland, and your parents have come over here or you've come over here, you can already apply for a change of gender on your birth certificate because you apply to your home state. And anyone living in Western Australia will have to apply to their home state. So this is not, they can do it already. With people who have come to Western Australia from overseas, they will be able to apply for a gender recognition certificate. We can't change the UK's registration details, and I'm not quite sure what they are of all the other countries around the world, but people will be able to apply for a gender recognition certificate. This is very important reform for so many of our transgender people in our community. And the government is committed to seeing this reform and the other reforms which will be coming through very early in the new year by the government. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions in a moment.
Dylan, would you like to step up and have a picture?
Sorry, Dylan.
No, you're fine. Thank you.
Because I'll hand over to Dylan now from Transfolk WA.
So Transfolk of WA is an organisation that exists to inform, empower and advocate for trans and gender diverse people in WA to survive and thrive. Transfolk are always going to welcome changes that improve the lives and the well-being of all trans and gender diverse people in WA. The current Births, Deaths and Marriages Registration Act and the Gender Reassignment Board imposes requirements on our community which have been described by people of the community in WA as humiliating and inhumane. For those in our community who will now, because of this reform, avoid this cruel process, we welcome the reform and grateful that they're spared this suffering. The abolition of the Gender Reassignment Board will allow trans and gender diverse West Australians an improved pathway to align their legal documentation more closely with their gender identity. We are pleased also that non-binary members of our community will now have an option to choose a more appropriate gender designator. This will improve the lives and save lives of many trans and gender diverse people in Western Australia. Transfolk WA also recognises the proposed legislation is not entirely in line with calls from community and is not in step with best practice legislation that is seen in other jurisdictions, nor have the recommendations of the Law Reform Commission report been adopted in full as we would have hoped. We continue to encourage the government to consider these best practice options and to consult with stakeholders such as Transfolk and other community organisations in this space. Transfolk of WA will continue to advocate to secure further policy improvements and legislative reform for our community. We will be making further recommendations to the government regarding the regulations for this proposed bill and advocating for further law reform that we have seen interstate. But for now, for the members of our community whose lives will be improved by this reform, we're taking the opportunity to celebrate the positive impact this will have. And we look forward to continuing ongoing advocacy work with the government and advocating for how we best meet the needs of our community. Thank you.
Dylan, what do you mean when you
Check
say?
your surname and spelling of first and last name.
Yeah, Dylan Green, Dylan, Green, Green. Thank you.
Dylan, what do you mean when you say it's not in line with best practice?
We've seen in other states that certain requirements for clinical evidence have been removed for adults over the age of 18, so they use a self-determination model. That is what is widely considered best practice, but we also see that this is a huge step forward from where we are, and that we will continue to advocate for these and further reforms, but the abolition of the reassignment board is a cause for celebration.
Just to be clear, so in other states you don't need a letter from a doctor or a psychologist to change your gender?
Not in every state, but in some other states, yes.
And is there any concern around the control of needing both parents' consent for 12 to 18-year-olds? Is there concern about the impact that can have on 15 to 16-year-olds if there's one parent holding out?
Yeah, there is, from discussions we've had with the government, there are going to be pathways for people in that situation. So we are happy that that's going to be in the legislation. And I guess also when regulations are being developed, we'll get more of an idea of what that looks like and be able to comment on it more further.
Do you know how many people a year were going through the process of the reassignment board?
I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. One of the issues was that it can take quite a period of time from application to a result. So I don't know the exact.
Was that a deterrent? That in itself, was that a deterrent?
I would say yes, but more strongly the deterrent was that there was a lot more clinical requirements. So what we've heard from our community is that the numerous clinical requirements from different types of doctors, and also the fact that there was a requirement for surgical or hormonal or medical intervention was costly, and access to things like psychiatrists, psychologists, endocrinologists, surgeons, wait lists are very long and they're very costly. So that's the main reason that we are welcoming this change.
Is it a case of then this, not going as far as you would like, but going much further than would have otherwise been possible? Or at least, it's much further ahead than now?
Yeah, I guess our acknowledgement is that for a portion of our community, this will be a massive impact. There is going to be a portion that still have barriers and still are not going to be able to access their desired outcome for a number of reasons, but for a good portion of our community, we think this is a really positive step forward.
Is there concern, and the Attorney General will probably say more about the timeline, or at least we'll ask about the timeline more later, but is there any concern that the second tranche is on hold with regard to banning conversion therapy and the like?
I guess as a representative of Trans Folk WA, I'm probably not placed best to comment on that, but there's organisations out there that are advocating strongly, specifically around conversion practices and around the other reforms that are coming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to address the
Thank you all for coming. Today I can finally stand here as a proud Western Australian and transgender woman. The reforms will be amazing for a lot of people in our community, and we very much welcome them. The deterrent for me over the years when I was living in Victoria for all those years, and then found out that I had to do it here in Perth, was I had to sit in front of some people and they decided my gender. They actually decided who I was. And for me, I didn't want to go through that. I thought it was archaic, and now we've taken a huge step into this millennium in the reforms that have been put forward by the Cook government, the Attorney General, John Quigley, and everyone who's worked so terrifically hard with all stakeholders to make this come true. So, I can stand here now and say all of my tribes are now a part of the community, and will continue to work for further reforms. What we've got to understand with this sort of detail is there's no finishing line. Things evolve and they do take time. I just think it's a great recognition and a step forward from the government, and now I can stand here as a proud Western Australian. So, thank you.
So, Danielle, you didn't go through the gender reassignment board process, and you're looking forward to using this new mechanism?
Yeah, I'll be first in the queue. No, I didn't, purely based on, I had all my psych detail, I had all my details, but I felt that it was wrong for someone to sit there and tell me who I was. They haven't walked a mile in my shoes. They don't know how I feel, and until they do, I probably wouldn't listen to them. But now I don't have to do that. I have all the details, and so I can get down to the offices there in the CBD and make it work.
So, Danielle, do you know how it will work practically in that, as far as, I think cisgender people maybe get confused about, will I have to tick a different box other than, male, female? Will you be ticking a different box? Do you get to choose the term that works best for you? How practically?
Yeah, my term is female, which I have been able to get on my passport, but not on my birth certificate. So now that all that's aligned, and I'm so very grateful for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Any questions for the Attorney General?
John, do you have a timeline for the second tranche? For the gay conversion ban, is there a timeline for that?
There is. It'll be next year, and as you know, I won't be leading.
So after the election?
It will be after the election for a couple of reasons. The federal government has announced the Australian Law Reform Commission findings, and the Prime Minister has come out and said on some contentious areas he is hopeful of getting bipartisan support. I don't want to come in from left field and upset the apple cart. Let's give the Prime Minister a few months to try and work out bipartisan support, because the argument, the public debate, can become hurtful for the community.
So it's not because you're running scared from that debate before an election?
No, here I am doing transgender reform. We're not running scared of anything. We've already stood up. I've stood up in the Parliament as the Attorney General and have tabled the Equal Opportunities report, which I commissioned, and after taking that to Cabinet, announced to the Parliament the broad support for the Law Reform Commission's report. I say broad support, there's a couple of areas there which are a bit iffy. I talk about, for example, discriminating against people over physical appearance. I wouldn't have got anywhere, would I? The way I look, we've got to be careful in some of the fringe areas, but the real areas that we're talking about here today, total support.
Is that timeline the same then for the Equal Opportunities Act and also for surrogacy reform after the next election?
No, we're trying to get surrogacy reform fixed before the election. We've got a lot of law reform on at the moment. I went through the list with the Premier earlier this week. It's some heavy lifting, legislative lifting this year. I don't know, Josh, whether we're going to get it on this year. I'm hopeful that we will.
And there are components of the Equal Opportunities Act, like modernising sexual harassment in the workplace, which aren't particularly controversial. Will you break that up and get it done before the election?
No, I've had a look at trying to cherry pick some hot topics out of the Equal Opportunities Act, but it's all interlaced. And if I try to take out those ones that you're talking about sexual discrimination in the workplace, then it brings in whole concepts of who's the employer. Like for parliamentary staff, it's really the Parliament. I've got to deal with that. That's not right. All the people have got to be protected. It's too hard to cherry pick.
Was this cherry picked out of the Equal Opportunities Act?
Sorry?
The abolishment of the Gender Reassignment Board, was that cherry picked out of the Equal Opportunities Act?
No, but it was covered in the Law Reform Commission's report, but the Sex Reassignment Board comes under different legislation, so I was able to sort of knock that aside.
Is there any concern, though, that the makeup of a new Legislative Council after the election, potentially without Labor having a majority, will make the second tranche much harder to pass?
I don't expect so. I hope that parliamentarians of a reasonable mind approach this not as political ideology, but delivering justice for vulnerable people in our community.
Just to clarify on the practicalities, you mentioned certain classes of offenders being barred. Is that to prevent sex offenders from then having gender reassigned and being moved into female prison populations, etc.?
Well, they can't be moved into female prison population at present. The department's got ways of managing that at present. But clearly, you don't want someone who, for example, has been convicted of a nasty, aggravated sexual offence, then changing gender so that they can access women-only areas.
And just to clarify from a practical perspective, what will be the terms available now on a birth certificate?
The descriptors, all right. The descriptors will be contained in regulation, and the descriptors will be male, female, binary, or intersex/indeterminate. That last descriptor, people don't usually ascribe to themselves, intersex or non-determinative. It's because we're not changing anything about the process of registration of a baby's birth. And that last descriptor usually comes from the doctor or midwife who's seeing the bub, says, I can't tell. So I'll just put down for the meantime, indeterminate. The other three, male, female, binary, they're for the person to choose. It'll be those four descriptors. They will be in regulation. And when you asked Danielle about registrations, etc., it was Dylan, about not being as far as some other states. Some other states, you can just come up with your own description. It'll be in regulation. There'll be a statutory review within 3 years, and if further descriptors are appropriate and there's community push for those, then perhaps they can be included in the 3 years. This is a big leap forward, and we're very proud as a government to be doing this. Thank you.
Is it right that an adult trans person now, at the passing of this legislation, will be able to change their birth certificate, but it'll still be legal for them to be discriminated against in a workplace setting until the reforms from the Equal Opportunity Act are passed?
Well, they can't be discriminated if they've been discriminated against their sex. What we'll be doing is a slight amendment to the Equal Opportunities Act for recognition of the birth certificates with the gender.
As part of Trans 1.
As part of Trans 1. There'll be a slight. You'll see it in the bill when I table it later, or tomorrow, and do my second reading. That there'll be just some slight consequential amendments in the Equal Opportunities Act.
There are tensions within your party about how long the reforms are taking for the Equal Opportunity Acts. Have some of your cabinet colleagues lost credibility by not being able to achieve those reforms in this term of government?
Not at all. I'm the Attorney General, and I think that when I announced my retirement, the Premier said I'd done over 60 pieces of legislation. My hair's fallen out to try and get it all done.
You couldn't get this one done, though, does that?
Well, I have. I've nearly got it across the line. Then we've got the Commonwealth coming in from left field. I don't want to...
You promised it last year, though.
Sorry?
You promised it would be passed last year.
Well, I've got drafting issues. There's drafting issues. You want to deliver on everything. Talk about my retirement. The end is closer than what I would like in terms of the legislation I'd like to get through. But that's something someone's got to live with, you know. The end is in sight, and I'm doing as much as I can. And as I said in my retirement, this is not a victory lap. This is the bell lap. We're doing as much as we possibly can.
Thanks, Attorney. The Premier needs to get to Parliament as well, so it might take some questions.
Any other issues?
Just your response to the EPA announcement by Tanya Plibersek today. The EPA will have decision-making powers, which is something that some stakeholders in the resources sector are concerned about. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think the Commonwealth Government is demonstrating that they're listening. The Prime Minister and the Minister for the Environment are showing that they've listened to the concerns of industry. So the changes that they've suggested today are about consulting further, about continuing to make sure that they deal with the substantial parts of the legislation in the first instance, which are around compliance and regulation, as opposed to providing approvals. This is, I think, a sensible approach by the Commonwealth. It shows that they're listening to the WA government, and it shows that they're listening to WA industry.
You've warned against duplication, though, from a Commonwealth deliver a Commonwealth EPA. Isn't that exactly what you warned against?
No, Commonwealth EPA is part of their election mandate. I respect that. But we do want to make sure that there's not too onerous obligations placed on industry. If they get through one gateway on the basis of the environmental credentials of that project, they should be suitable for getting through any gateway.
Is your belief that the federal EPA should mirror the West Australian EPA though, and that a recommendation is made and then the minister makes the decision?
Well, I understand the Commonwealth want to achieve a particular standard with regards to environmental approvals, and Western Australia is very proud of its environmental approvals process. We're continuing to undertake reform in that area, and that would obviously, we believe, receive the Commonwealth Government's tick of approval.
What do you make of the supermarket inquiry currently in the federal side?
Well, I think competition policy in Australia is something which needs to be closely examined. I think in the supermarket sector, it's plain as the nose on everyone's faces that we don't have proper competition in the supermarket sector.
Just on Nature Positive, there were frustrations from the green groups. There was obviously concern and frustration born out of the mining industry, and also criticism over lack of consultation. Did it strike you, did you see any similarities to this as to your government's Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act?
Not at all. We already know that the Commonwealth has undertaken extensive consultation. We also know that there is remaining concerns from both industry and the community in relation to the balance of where they're landing in terms of this. So it's appropriate that Tanya Plibersek has made the statements she has today. It really is a common sense approach that she'll take the opportunity to continue to listen, to consult, and to make sure that we get the balance right.
I believe you asked about the school strike this morning.
Yeah.
Do you have any updated information as to when parents will know whether they can take their kids to school that morning?
No, look, we don't have information yet, but we know the department is working on an operational plan for the day. As I said, I think the industrial action is unnecessary. We have only just recently put out a new offer to the teachers. That has yet to actually make its way to the membership, or if it has, it's been in the last 24 hours. The industrial action is entirely premature. We invite and in fact seek the teachers' union to come back to the negotiating table. Let's work together in good faith and move forward.
And apologies if I'm doubling up on this morning,
That's right.
but after the endorsement of the Labor candidates overnight, is the unofficial election campaign now well underway, and does the confirmation of Daniel Pastorelli standing change anything in the makeup of your office as we get closer to election day and he campaigns for?
Well, to the second point that you make, or the second question that you ask, obviously everyone who works in government has a responsibility to comply with their duties in terms of being a government official, and of course comply with the electoral laws in relation to the way they conduct themselves. So that will be what it will be. Can I just say, we don't take anything for granted. My government will seek another term on the basis of taking to the people of Western Australia a plan for the future. WA knows that ICE do what's right for Western Australia, and we'll always stand up for WA, but we take nothing for granted. This is going to be a contest of ideas, a contest about who is best to take Western Australia forward. The Liberals can't be trusted. You look at them, they're a shambolic mess, and they're dysfunctional and chaotic. You can only trust a WA Labor government to take the state forward.
Are you going to have a part-time chief of staff for the next 12 months?
No, I'll have a chief of staff who will be able to combine both his campaign and ministerial official responsibilities, and that's a requirement. If that becomes an issue, or if there's any conflict, we'll manage that.
There's a rally at Parliament House calling for the abolition of no-fault evictions. Are you ignoring that completely? Is it something that you even think about now?
No, well, we have put our package to the Parliament, and that's going through the Parliament now. It's a balanced it's a balanced outcome. We've talked to all sectors across the housing industry and across the advocacy sectors to make sure that we get that balance right. The one thing that we want to make sure is that we continue to grow the supply of rental housing in Western Australia. So if we kill the investment market, we're not going to actually achieve that outcome. But we want justice for tenants as well, which is the reason why we've brought in the reforms we have, which is around making only one opportunity a year to increase rent or review rentals, making sure that that there's greater assistance for tenants who are seeking to resolve issues with their landlord. We've also brought in our rental assistance package, a $1.7 million package to support renters. And of course, we've brought in our steps to try to take accommodation out of the short-term rental accommodation market to bring them onto the long-term rental market. And that's led to 100 homes coming onto that market, which, given the tightness of that market at the moment, is an important outcome. We think we've got the balance right, and we'll continue to make sure that that legislation can move through the Parliament.
Last question to Kason quickly.
Sorry, for the Attorney General.
Yep, one last question for the Attorney General. We better rush off. One last question.
Sorry, just on knife laws. Queensland's looking at potentially expanding its stop and search laws, known as Jack's Law, into shopping centres. I understand you're meeting with Jack Beasley's father soon, if not next week. How top of mind are stop and search laws here in WA for knives?
The Queensland government introduced WAMN laws, and we're looking at those, and I'm studying those at the moment and preparing something for the Premier. Especially in protected entertainment precincts. In Queensland, it's not stop and search, it is a wand that will detect the presence of metal. We are not proposing stop and search for the general population, but there is an argument to have wanding in protected entertainment precincts. And I will be making a submission to the Premier when I've completed...
Will you consider shopping centres, given what's happened in Sydney?
I'll be considering all of those matters that's happened around Australia and in Perth with some stabbings. It's a dreadful trend, and we intend to offer the community as much protection as the law can offer. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Is there
Thank you.
time for a quick group photo?
Yeah, I think if we head over...